It is I, Madeline, in case you're new to this channel or you somehow missed the name of this channel. And with that being said, to the video. I know that there's a lot of people already who have posted their very lukewarm to room temperature takes on I didn't expect a global pandemic to be part of my college experience, but here I am. And I'm arguably contributing to that already huge pool. And I don't think that I'm presenting anything exactly unique in the sense that I'm not bringing anything that has never been talked about, but I do think that discussing recovery, especially in regards to an incident like a pandemic, is important. And it's one of those things where the more people who talk about it and share, the better. Topics like recovery do need to be discussed more, especially in such a troubling time like right now. So I've never explicitly said on this channel, at the very least, but when I was 15, I was diagnosed with OCD. It wasn't until I was seeing a therapist and then a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with OCD that I thought that I might have it, because my room, it's not super spick and span, or whatever the saying is. Like when you close your eyes, you think of someone with OCD, you probably think of some insane perfectionist who has to organize everything perfectly, who has to put everything into straight single file lines, or I don't know, like something quirky, or something to even aspire to be. And there's quite frankly not many things I wouldn't give to have my OCD be that kind of a useful characteristic quirk. It's unfortunately not. For me, OCD is this terrible image that's apocalyptic, horrifying, unthinkable, that I can't get out, and the only way that I knew how to cope with it was to engage in certain behaviors or rituals. I don't want to go too much into detail over the definition of OCD, since I'm not a psychiatrist or a specialist in psychology. These are simply how I have been experiencing it. So yeah, one of my apocalyptic obsessive thoughts that I had was that I would accidentally hurt or contaminate someone, especially someone who I love, and the only way to prevent that kind of an incident would be to excessively wash my hands, to the point that my hands were pretty dry even if I put pounds of lotion on. And there would also be just this overwhelming overall sense of guilt of I need to do everything right, and somehow any slight error, wrongdoing, etc. would put the world in danger, essentially. The specific details would kind of change, like how the world would end or how I would cause havoc or harm, but that was the overall summary of my obsessive thoughts. And with the help of a professional team, I've had it pretty much under control. So much so that last fall, I even got off of one of my medications that was to manage my OCD, and it was a bumpy road, but I learned how to cope with these catastrophic thoughts without engaging in my behaviors, and learning how to cope with them in a way that was more productive. And eventually it got to the point where even if they did come and go, my whole day wouldn't be consumed by the rituals and the obsessive thoughts that I had. Insert Exhibit A, coronavirus. So prior to corona, I thought I had gotten over my contamination obsessive thoughts. I mean, that's not to say that they went away completely, but it would be kind of like those things where the thought would just kind of pop up and then I could just push it aside and it felt under control. It wasn't draining me, it wasn't consuming my time, my energy, and I thought at that point that I was over that part of OCD. And I think something that I wasn't very well aware of is OCD is oftentimes a lifelong thing. It isn't something that you just magically get over with time. And B, OCD can be brought back, whether it's in the same form or maybe it's a new obsessive thought. Oftentimes, again, it's not a one and done thing. The virus at that point wasn't pandemic level, but there were cases kind of popping up here and there in the county that I go to college in, and that's when I started noticing that my contamination fears came back. And to an extent, I guess it was pretty understandable. It's obvious that we should be cautious about spreading germs and practice social distancing and washing hands and what have you, but it got to the point where I felt like I was thrown back in, and this was really discouraging because here I was thinking that I got this chapter of my life over with for good, and turns out it wasn't defeated, it was just waiting to be reawoken. And I felt crushed, to say the very least. And this made it especially hard for me to resume school online. Obviously, shifting to Zoom University wasn't easy for anyone. If there's anyone who says that it was, I would like to have a very long discussion with them. On top of making the shift to online, I was juggling with OCD yet again. Something that I was so convinced that I was over, or at least very close to overcoming, and it felt like I was just back to where I started. In some ways, it was easier for me to manage because I had overcome it to an extent before, but in a lot more ways, it was more difficult because when I was 15, here my therapist was telling me, no, you won't accidentally wreak havoc on your loved ones if you don't wash your hands excessively. And it just kind of felt like my anxieties were being validated. That this time around, it wasn't an irrational fear. It was perfectly rational to scrub until my hands were chafing, to clean every surface, to be constantly terrified of potentially being a host. And this is still something that I'm working on. It was difficult to say the very least. And I think that taught me that progress isn't as bulletproof as we like to think it is. And that sounds discouraging, and I realize that. But I feel like a lot of times it's easy to be overconfident with our progress and its resilience. And we kind of let our guard down thinking, okay, we'll let this behavior slide or this thought slide. And then it's not until we feel like we've hit rock bottom until we realize, oh, we've slipped yet again. But anyways, I've managed to get through the semester and my OCD symptoms, and I've been getting a lot of great support from my friends and parents and sister, and I realized that that's a privilege. I finished the semester pretty strong, and I was chatting with my advisor who congratulated me for getting on the dean's list, and every semester I tell myself that this is the semester I'm going to get on the dean's list. And every semester before this one, I've been sorely disappointed with myself because I would just not be able to make it. And I would blame myself and pick myself apart. But this semester I had prioritized my well-being, and it showed. However, it would be naive for me to say that this accomplishment, or even getting through the semester by itself, was just because of my hard work and merit. And beforehand, admitting this privilege made me feel terrible. I mean, I don't think that it should make anyone feel great, but I would feel so much guilt that there were people just like me, or struggling even more, who weren't able to get adequate care, and it felt like I was, in a sense, hogging resources from them, and it was unfair that I was getting help, but others aren't. And honestly, this is still something that I'm working on, and it is unfair. Or I'm not any more deserving of help than anyone else is. No one is. But denying myself care isn't going to magically give that amount of care to someone else. And I think that was a huge realization that I needed to have before I could actually welcome care without hesitation. On a plane ride, we've all heard flight attendants tell us that we need to put on our own oxygen mask before helping someone else. And essentially, me saying, I don't deserve help because other people don't have access, wasn't even me giving my oxygen mask to someone else. It was just me not putting on an oxygen mask for anyone, which obviously doesn't help. And I don't know exactly how to help, and that's really frustrating. Not just for me, but for anyone. I guess what I want people to take away from this video is, if you are able to get help, please do. If you decide that you don't deserve help and therefore you won't get it, that doesn't pass it on to someone else. It instead just increases the number of people who need help and healing. And of course we should be cognizant of our different privileges. Something that I've kind of come to realize is it's not so much the circumstance, but the experience. And what I mean by that is, imagine someone with, say, a peanut allergy. You wouldn't go up to someone with a peanut allergy, give them a PB&J sandwich, and tell them about how X number of people are starving every day. That's not going to help. That's not going to feed the person. That's not going to change the person's allergic reaction. That's just going to put them into shock and hurt them. I think a similar thing can be said about mental illness. I mentioned this in a blog post previously where I challenged people, including myself, to, instead of just saying a simple sentence, put a comma, but after it. So for example, I'm privileged that I'm able to get help, but I realize not everyone is. And by doing so, I guess I challenge everyone, again including myself, to recognize the validity of both statements without guilt, without judging it as morally good or bad, but just as a neutral statement that can help push for more proactive change. I guess I hope that by creating content like this, I can help people realize that, as cheesy as it sounds, that they're not alone in experiencing certain things. Of course, each person's individual experience is unique, but I want people to know that they're not the first person to feel a certain way, and they certainly won't be the last. I guess I just kind of want to provide that kind of reassurance. Again, I think that for topics like mental health, the more the merrier, and I hope that I encourage that kind of dialogue to happen. If not me, then someone else. But with that being said, thanks so much for spending time with me and listening to me blab for however long this video is. Stay safe and stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time. Bye.